Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Nexus Gains Talk 11. So hopefully everybody's in the right place. The focus of this talk is applying a Nexus tool to support water allocation reform in the shared Incomati River Basin. I am Jonathan Lautzi. I'm a research group leader at the International Water Management Institute. In the context of Nexus Gains, I lead Work Package 2, and I also coordinate the Southern African activities of Nexus Gains. So before we dive into the specifics of this talk, I just wanted to give a couple slides of framing and contextualization of the specific activity in the Incomati. Okay, there we go. In terms of Nexus Gains Southern African activities, of which this Incomati activity forms one, we currently have activities across 4 work packages of Nexus Gains. So the first one listed there is what we're going to talk about today, which is focused on this Pywr model development for the Incomati. We do this in partnership with the 3 countries which share the Incomati Basin. You'll hear more about them shortly, as well as the Transboundary River Basin Organization, which goes by the acronym INMACOM. As well as other key partners like University of Manchester, who's going to have a staff member speak today. And the aim of this is basically to support dialogue that enhances water, energy, food ecosystem benefits through improved transboundary water allocation in the basin. We're in Southern Africa also active in the context of Work Package 2 in the Shashe catchment of the Limpopo Basin. This is a catchment shared by Botswana and Zimbabwe. There's a range of partners in both of those countries, as well as the Transboundary RBO again, which in this context is LIMCOM, with whom we partner. And basically, the aim of that activity in Work Package 2 is to understand and plan in terms of water based on the full set of water storage options. In short, that means utilizing both green and gray infrastructure. So all types of storage in this broader continuum, and then in particular giving some focus to sand dams. In the context of Work Package 4, there's some recent work in the last 2-3 months that's gotten off the ground, and in partnership with IFPRI, somebody named Ryan Naring from IFPRI has been quite important in spearheading this latest activity. There's been efforts towards multi-stakeholder platform development in the Incomati. And so a key aim of that is to foster cross-sector, cross-country input into transboundary decision-making. And then a final work package that we have activities on in Southern Africa is around capacity strengthening through WEF Nexus Masterclass and Winter School. And a colleague of ours at IMI, Tafazwa Mabaudi, spearheads that work. With key partners in the region like Southern African Development Community, Global Water Partnership, and others. And a key aim of this is to enhance elementary understanding, and engage in hands-on exercises in the WEF. So in terms of the activities, you'll probably put together or connect the dots that no doubt we hope for key synergies between Work Package 1 and Work Package 4. A key workshop we're aiming for later this year will have the platform convene to react to some of the modeling results which we're going to present today. So that's a bit more about Nexus Gains activities in the Southern Africa region. I also just wanted to contextualize this activity that we're going to present today in the context of IMI's growing transboundary waters portfolio. IMI has around 7 projects across 8 basins, that sum up to about $10 million in total across both Asia and Africa. You can see the schematic there on the right of your screen. Some of the basins that we're active in, I'll just give a quick flavor now, maybe from west to east. In the Mono Basin, that features the case study in a recently secured GEF, Global Environmental Facility project. And they're looking at surface groundwater issues and better understanding groundwater so it can help cope with a range of issues like floods. A colleague in West Africa, Mokhtar Dembele, is spearheading that work. In the Benue, we have a large ICI-funded project there that's centered around transboundary climate change adaptation, in particular between Cameroon and Nigeria. Southern Africa, you heard me mention earlier, the Shashe, which is focused on integrated storage planning across countries. and that's Nexus Gains, part of Nexus Gains program. And then the Incomati work in the bottom right corner, you hear more about today. Moving kind of north, you see the CGIAR mentioned there, which IMI is engaged in for quite some time, pushing a decade now. Girma Ibrahim drives that work, which is centered around surface groundwater management across borders. Looking up towards the right, you'll see some Asian basins that receive focus there. AFPAC, there's 3 AFPAC shared basins on which we place key focus. We've about to publish a State of the River Basin report on those 3 shared waters. We had a nice co-development exercise to produce a book there, and that's through a USAID funding. And then in Central Asia, there's quite a range of small, basically sub-basins. In Karatag, you'll see mentioned there, as well as Narin and Shakimadanzai, that receive focus through both State Department and EU funding. A lot of that is centered on WEF Nexus in the Narin and Shakimadanzai, and then in the Karatag, it's around capacity development and data exchange. If I underline some key thrusts of this work that IMI does in transboundary waters, we often focus small. There's only 2 full basins in there, and they're both small. The rest of it is actually just sub-basin level. We often think conjunctive, integrating both surface and ground. We often center a lot of our work around integrating data across countries to expand knowledge, to inform decision-making. In terms of what separates out the Incomati, what's significant about it? Why is it a unique one? So, I mean, I've talked about this with a range of people. So there's an existing water allocation agreement, which in itself is quite interesting. Somehow, I mean, it's a surprise to many people when they learn about transboundary waters. A lot of the transboundary water law does not actually contain allocation. So the Incomati has that. They have a hard allocation rule. And then in addition to that, there's kind of appetite for reforming or updating the current allocation rule, which is exciting, and it highlights a potential role for IMI to play with collaborators like University of Manchester. It's also a data abundant basin, unlike almost every other basin I seem to work in the developing world. It's data rich, which is excellent, and I think is important to feed into a model which can support decision making. And then a final point that makes it unique is there's a new RBO, and I say new, meaning formed in 2021. And this is critical to support kind of inclusion across countries, and then to help drive or facilitate change in the way things are done. So there's more of a basin approach adopted. Yeah, that's just a bit of background. We transition to the presenters that you're going to hear from today. So the first presentation is going to come from Naga Velpuri. The title is Integrating Water Resource Management in Incomati, Applying a Nexus Tool to Support Water Allocation Reform. A bit about Naga. Naga is a senior researcher at IMI in remote sensing, hydrology, and modeling. He has more than 15 years of research experience in Asia, Africa, and the United States, addressing problems related to water availability and scarcity. And he currently leads IMI's water accounting team. After Naga's presentation, which is kind of a first step in this work we're doing in the Incomati, we're going to transition into a presentation from Mikias Etichia. Mikias is a PhD candidate in Julian Haru's research team at the University of Manchester's Water Resource Group. His research focuses on integrated water and energy systems in East and Southern Africa, with particular emphasis on the Nile and Incomati. So after presentations from Mikias second and then Naga first, we'll transition into a panel discussion. I'll introduce the 3 panelists after Naga and Mikias finish their presentations, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So with that, I'll thank you, and I'll stop sharing and hand over to my colleague, Naga. Thanks very much. I think you're on mute, Naga.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jonathan. I'm really excited to be doing this talk with you. As a quick announcement, if you have any questions, please do so. And in the Q&A section, you can post your questions, and then one of our colleagues or panelists will try to address these questions as we go. And then we'll have a question and Q&A session towards the end. So with that, I'm going to quickly jump into the presentation. So what I'm going to talk is basically set a tone for the rest of the talk and the panel discussion, basically trying to identify why we are doing this and how are we addressing the problems in the Incomati Basin. Start with the background here. So apart from what Jonathan has already discussed or shared with us, Incomati is a shared, transboundary basin, and it is shared by Eswatini, Mozambique. Let me minimize this. Eswatini, South Africa, and Mozambique. So 3 countries basically share the water from the Incomati River Basin. There's a River Basin Commission that is established in 2021, but there are a lot of agreements that go back to early 80s that we'll touch on in the next few slides. Yeah, the size of the basin is around 49,000 square kilometers. So it's small, but it's not relatively large enough, and encompasses more than 2 million people in the basin. So the main challenges, what we see here is that the water use is very intense in the basin, and when you compare with other basins in the South African region, Incomati uses a lot more water in terms of anthropogenic use. So the first graphic on the left gives you a statistic that more than 50% of the water is actually withdrawn for human consumption. And this is excluding the environmental water requirement and then the other water needs in the basin. So if you consider everything, most of the water is being used right now, and then the basin is moving towards closure. So which means that the discharge that is coming out of the basin is almost nil on an annual time scale. And also the basin is actually seeing competing water demand. So the water demand from industries and residential and agriculture is actually increasing year after year. So which is putting a lot of pressure on the water availability and scarcity situations. And we'll also touch on those aspects. So this poses a threat to the future water security in the region, especially because a lot of people are dependent on this water, and 3 countries actually have a lot of competing demands. And on top of that, every year this basin experiences a lot of extreme events, both in terms of floods as well as in droughts. So the floods are pretty common in the wet season. When it rains, a lot of water, the storage capacity is still limited and under development, because of which the delta regions in Mozambique usually sees a lot of floods. And in the dry season, it's quite opposite, where the flows are almost nothing, and it leads to a lot of drought and then a lack of water for a lot of environmental water needs. So touching on the scarcity issue, this actually is a plot here on the slide. On the x-axis, you see years, 1952 to 1980, and then on the y-axis, you see discharge. What you see is that there has been a declining discharge measured at Resno Garcia. This is a station just across the border in Mozambique. As the river flows into Mozambique, Mozambique has set up a station at Resno Garcia that measures the water. So what you see is that over the year, the low flows, especially during the dry seasons, have actually gone down. So the wet season flows have not significantly changed, but then the dry season flows or the low flows have actually shown significant decline. And the situation is somewhat similar post 1980. Even I don't have data for most recent years, but then from other studies and our discussions with the partners, the situation is somewhat similar that we have seen in the last decade since the 1970s. Also, coming up to the competing demands, the impact of these competing demands is not clearly understood. So there are 3 countries, and each country is developing their agriculture, their storage, and then the industrial demand, domestic demands are increasing as the population and the need is increasing. But then the integrated impact of these competing demands is not clearly understood. Mainly because there is no single river basin system model that is actually used across all the 3 countries. So Mozambique and Eswatini has some cooperations and agreements, and then the river basin organizations for some of those catchments. So they closely work together, but then Mozambique, being a downstream country, follows its own river basin system model, and there is no consistency among three countries. So there's lack of clarity on how these competing demands actually affect each other's water allocation and supplies. Coming up to the transboundary governance, as Jonathan pointed out, Incomati River Basin is actually one of the excellent examples for cooperation because they have multiple water sharing agreements. And they date back to early 80s. And then the main motivation for these agreements is basically that in early 80s, 1980s, there has been like some recurrent droughts that have actually reduced the cross-border flow to basically nothing. And all the three countries started to discuss, and then that brought all three countries to the table. And since then, they started developing and investing in storage structures, and irrigation has followed that the storage. So during 1983, 1991 time period, there's a lot of investments that have happened. In 1991, all the three countries actually met, mainly because the investments were backed up by the World Bank, and then the World Bank wanted some no objection certificates from the downstream country. So all of these led to more cooperation and more agreements. So during the 1991 agreement, it was decided that at the station, which is highlighted on the right side on the figure with the red dot, that's the station right before the border where the river enters the Mozambique. At that station, it was decided that there will be a minimum flow of 2 meter cube per second flowing into Mozambique all the time. And this 2 meter cube per second was decided based on the downstream environmental demand, especially in the estuary, in the delta, where there is a lot of wetlands and estuary that has a lot of biodiversity issues, and that can be taken care of. So considering that, they came up with a 2 meter cube per second of minimum flow that has to be maintained all the time at the Incomati port at the border. However, in 2002, there was another interim Inco-Maputo agreement, and so the Maputo River actually is the south of the river flows south of the Incomati River, and there are two different river basins, Maputo and Incomati. But then the agreement with Maputo was also added, and it's actually a two-basin agreement with all the three countries, because they share the same delta. So Maputo also flows into the same delta as Incomati. So there was an interim meeting that actually led to an updating of that minimum flow, because that 2 meter cube per second was no longer sufficient for Mozambique to meet its downstream water demands. So they increased it to 2.6 meter cube per second. But in that same report, there was a provision that, okay, this is just one single value for the entire year, then there is a need to update it and make it more seasonal or more representative of the flow during the year. Because in the wet season, we see a lot more flows than 2 meter cube per second. And this 2.6 meter cube per second is more relevant in the dry season. So the new transboundary allocation right now is under development. So all the three countries are working together, and then they meet regularly during the tripartite, the technical committee meetings. And then the motivation is to update these numbers to more reasonable and then more optimal solutions, that find optimal solutions for all the three countries. So with that, the objective of this study is to develop the model that can actually be used by the INMACOM. INMACOM is the river basin organization that was recently set up, that will be working with all the three countries and helping them identify transboundary solutions. So within our framework, we wanted to use a Nexus tools, which we are going to introduce in the next couple of slides, and also a colleague from University of Manchester will highlight it. So with that tool, we are trying to understand the impact of competing basin demands and how we can optimize water allocation in the basin. and also understand the water resources impact of potential dams. So there's a lot of dams that are proposed right now that are currently under construction, but then the impact of those dams is not clearly understood, not just by itself, but as an integrated way. How does the upstream water is affected versus the downstream impact needs to be assessed. And also we are looking at understanding water resources impact of increased irrigation due to the increase in the storage from the dam. And then also the fourth question that we are trying to answer is to quantify the changes in the basin outflow under different scenarios. So how is this going to affect the 2.6 meter cube per second with all the investments and then the storage and the dams being constructed upstream and downstream? Is 2.6 still relevant, or do we need to make it into a different number, and how can we arrive that, and then what is an optimal solution for all of the basin countries is one question that we're trying to answer. So with these goals in mind, we started working with INMACOM. We did a first workshop in August of 2022, where we all met with INMACOM officials from INMACOM facilitating the meeting and bringing all the member states together. So 18 participants from 3 countries attended that, and then we took a stock of all the country level modeling efforts, and then we realized that there is no consistency in modeling and results produced because each country has their own way of handling things. And then we introduced the Pywr model as one of the potential solutions to address some of the problems in the basin. And we agreed
about 2 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. And then we agreed to develop a co-development approach where we try to bring in the young professions from the member states and also from the river basin organizations whom we can work with closely to build the model. So we did another meeting early this year, where we presented some preliminary results and then try to identify key questions that can be answered. And one of the key questions is what is the impact of the Moamba Dam that is being under construction, and how can we optimize the flow so that we can actually help them address identifying the new transboundary flow requirements. So Pywr model, this is the Nexus tools that I was talking about. It's an open source Python-based simulator developed by University of Manchester, and has been heavily published. And it also addresses water energy nexus model. So basically, it'll help you understand not only the water resources, but also hydropower, and then food as well is included in that model. So this is the framework that we developed. This is my last slide, the framework that we developed with the young professionals, where the young professionals helped us build the data and the model. So they brought a lot of data onto the table, which was not publicly available, but then was available with the member states. So we could gather a lot of data to build the model. And then we had these weekly meetings with the young professionals, and really thank INMACOM for all the efforts of facilitating these, because now we have that contact and working relationship with all the member states and the river basin organization. So with that, I'm going to stop here and let my colleague Matthias from University of Manchester talk more about the Pywr model and then the results.
Thanks,
Thanks, Naga. That was. Oh,
sorry.
are you ready to go, Naga, straight away? Sorry, Matthias.
Yeah. Let me share my screen.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
We're looking at a volcano.
I think. Okay, maybe I'm sharing the wrong. What about now?
Yes, great.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Naga, for the background. In my presentation, I'm going to cover and talk in detail about the river basin model, the Incomati River system model that we developed, and some initial investigation that we did. So the river basin model that we developed, the spatial coverage is in South Africa, Swatini, Mozambique. The schematic on the right shows the river basin model. As you can see, it's very detailed. And some of the component of the river basin model is showing by the legend. It includes around 172 reservoirs, both the major reservoirs in the basin as well as the farm dams. It also includes a detailed representation of domestic, industrial, and interbasin transfer to adjacent river basins. It is a model at monthly time step, and it runs for 50 years from 1960 to 2009. As you can see here, it's more detailed in South Africa and Swatini, but the model is more coarser in Mozambique. Downstream, this because mainly scarcity of data. We get a lot of data from South Africa and Swatini side. So there are two assurance levels in the model. There is a high assurance level and a low assurance level. Domestic water and domestic and industrial water abstraction are given a high assurance terms of allocation, and then hydropower, irrigation, and exotic plant species given the low assurance level. And irrigation water demand is derived using FAO 56 method. We developed the model using water strategy, a dedicated website to build a complex water resource model. What Naga shared with the Pywr model, because you need to have a Python background in order to use that. But there is this water strategy website which enables you to build water resource model on the web interface. It's easy to use graphical interface and collaborate remotely with stakeholders. For instance, we built this model with the collaboration of young professionals from the 3 countries collaborating remotely. It's easy to share, and multiple users can interact with the same model. Also, they can also build and work on the same model. To show you the web interface, this is the model on the web interface, which enables you to share, to visualize the result, and also to build the model from scratch. I think it's computer start. Let's wait. Yeah, so we calibrated and validated the model in 14 locations across the basin. We used the data, observed data from 1996 up to 1996 for calibration, and then from 1996 onward for validation. As you can see on the figure, the observed data is represented by the blue line, and then the model is represented by the red line. The performance of the model is excellent in most river gauge locations. We use reservoir operating rules to calibrate the model. So we did 2 investigations. One of the investigations that we did is there is this reservoir called Moamba Major Dam in Mozambique, which is represented by the red triangle on the map. This reservoir is under construction, and once it's completed, it will have a capacity of around 730 million cubic meter of volume. And what we formulated 2 scenarios where we have the existing reservoir operation continues, and where we have a coordinated reservoir operation after Moamba Major Dam is developed. As you can see here, with the coordinator operation of reservoir in the basin, the water supply for Mozambique will increase, and also for South Africa and Swatini. But irrigation water supply in South Africa and Swatini is reduced. The other investigation that we did is Naga was talking about the transboundary minimum release at Incomati port, which is shown by the red dot on the figure. So what he did was, what if we vary or increase the existing minimum daily release, which is 2.65 cubic meter per second, which if you convert to 2 million meter cube per day, is going to be 0.22 million meter cube per day. And what if we increase it to 1 million meter cube per day? So we formulated an optimization where we have 8 objectives. So the objectives are to maximize the water supply of irrigation for the 3 countries, and also increase the irrigation water supply for domestic water demand, and also increase aggregated hydropower generation from dams in Mozambique. So this is the result. The result, this plot shows the parallel plot. These are the objective, the 8 objectives that I showed in the previous slide, and this is a variable.
Did we lose? Did we lose?
I think we lost him. Yeah.
Okay.
Or Julian, do you want to step in?
Yeah, I can step in. I don't think I have the latest, but that's okay. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're taking this Pywr model that we've recently created, and we're linking it to a multi-objective optimization algorithm. Now, what that means is you can pick a range of decision variables that were mentioned in the last slide and see what are the series of operating rules for the key reservoirs that would maximize the benefits of all these countries and their different uses. So that's what these 8 lines are here. We have the minimum flow at Incomati port, which is not fixed. It can vary. So we have the minimum level there is 0.3 million liters per day, but can go all the way up to 1. And so what this does is that it shows us, as we move that minimum flow from 0.2 to 1, how that change in management affects all the other benefits. And you can see that these are South Africa's domestic water use, South Africa's irrigation water use, the same for Mozambique and Eswatini. So you can think of this as a sensitivity analysis, which is trying out all the different combinations of minimum flows between 0.2 and 1. And that's really the benefit of Pywr. Pywr is a simulation model, but because it runs very quickly, it allows you to do these optimization sensitivity analyses, which are, it may look like there's a lot of gray lines there, but that's actually a very small subset of optimized rule sets. So as you move from 0.2 to 1 million liters per day, you're getting each of those gray lines represents an optimized set of operating rules for the dam that finds the best solution that's Pareto efficient for all these countries. So it's a quite sophisticated plot. And there's the blue and the red solutions there were outlined. One was the current level, and one was going up to 1. And you can see here for those 2 extreme situations of keeping the current minimum flows or looking at the future minimum flows, that would be much, much higher, given assuming optimized, multi-objective optimized operating rules. This is showing you how those 2 minimum flows would impact other dams. And you can see that Sorry, Jonathan, could you just go back one slide just to remember what the red and blue?
I'm worried a bit about time. We're really falling behind. So,
Okay.
so yeah, maybe I
I'll just
wanted
go
to just, maybe if we can, and I can offer my interpretation of this slide. So basically the upper two graphs are dams in South Africa and Eswatini, upstream countries, Driekopies and Maguga. And then the lower is this potential future dam in Muamba, in Mozambique. And I think what Macias and you, Julian, were trying to show on this one, when you compare again, red and blue, red is the potential future alternate scenario, and then blue is the existing scenario. So if you went with an alternate scenario of elevating or increasing the minimum flow downstream, I think the point is to show that the volumes in the two upstream reservoirs, those two at the top, it would drop somewhat compared to this current status quo. The current status quo would have higher storage levels in the reservoirs. However, in the potential Muamba reservoir, which is downstream, there would actually be higher volumes when there's under this higher flow release to the downstream countries. So I think that's what Macias was trying to show with this one. But I'm also a bit concerned on time. I'll go back to you, Julian. Maybe you could add to what I just added on this slide, and then
it's fine. Yeah, I'm seeing that the label was there. So of course, we're not advocating that either of these two sort of extreme solutions because these are the red and the blue are, if you remember from last slide, they were the extremes of the Pareto optimal set. So those are the kind of solutions that favor the blue or the red, and so there's all sorts of intermediate between them. So those could be assessed by the groups in INMACOM. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
This is our last one.
Okay, great. So as concluding, there's significant potential to enhance the allocation of benefits through the even without adding new reservoirs, simply by changing the operating rules of the reservoirs, and that allows to change how water is allocated and how the benefits are allocated. We can also look at the future agreement on the minimum flow at Incomati port, and that's what we were doing in that last slide, looking at how that affects the distribution of benefits. Regular reevaluation and rethinking of these arrangements can be helpful, and that's why having an online model is particularly beneficial here, because all the parties would have access to the model, and they can be constantly refining their views on how things might be managed better. So having a shared model allows that collaboration, not just every 10, 15 years, but on a permanent basis. And then this will also allow working on climate change impacts. But I've noticed now that I think I saw Macias's name there. Oh yeah, so Macias is back. So, anything you want to add, Macias?
Sorry, my computer crashed. No, that's all.
Okay, maybe I'll just underline one central thread that I think both Julian and Macias were trying to flag, which is these kind of existing treaty, that sort of scenario versus the other scenario. Those are two extremes, and that there's a range of option in between them. And then this ultimately is like a tool to decide on what's aligned with stakeholder preferences in the different countries across sectors. So I think this is a powerful tool to support that process. I think that was a central thrust that maybe we can close with and close this presentation, but then move straight over to the panel session. I apologize, everybody. We're lagging on the time, but let me stop sharing. Let me just introduce our panelists, and let's really give panelists 3 or so minutes each to offer their reactions. So there's 3 great panelists we have today. So the first is Mr. Edward Mswane, who's the Interim Executive Secretary for INMACOM. He has experience in IWMI, Integrated Water Resource Management, and is involved in transboundary waters for Eswatini, Mozambique, and South Africa in the Incomati and Maputo river basins. He's going to be the first of our 3 to offer reactions. The second is Dr. Laureen Catillo, who's a transboundary water governance and environment specialist at the Global Water Partnership Southern Africa and Africa Coordination Unit. She has 16 years of experience in water and environment sectors, and prior and current experiences include work in the Zambezi River Basin and WWF in the Limpopo, Oronsenku, Buze, Pungwe, Save, quite a number of river basins across Southern Africa, and in additional ones to those I just listed. So more than 16 years of experience in the transboundary waters in the region. The third of our three panelists, it will be Mr. Remy Kinna, who's a legal officer at the Secretariat of the UN Water Convention based in Geneva. He is the regional focal point for the convention in Southern and Eastern Africa and Asia, and he is responsible for the convention's program of work area on transboundary water allocation. So those are our three panelists. I'll go in that order from most local. Edward, who's focused on the basin, and will progressively zoom out to the region, and then get a global perspective from Remy. So Edward, over to you to offer some reactions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Firstly, let me thank the presenters, Naka and Mikias. The presentations they made, they were very, very informative. And also to introduce INMACOM to those who are not aware as to who INMACOM is. This, as it has been said, this is a relatively new RBO within the SADC structures. It was established in November 2021. And the secretariat for this RBO is in Eswatini, and the member states, as it has been highlighted, are the Kingdom of Eswatini, the Republic of Mozambique, and also the Republic of South Africa. This model will be very helpful in the Basin, in the Incomati Basin, because there are issues which we have in the Basin. Most of these issues which I'm going to mention were raised by stakeholders in a stakeholder workshop that was held in Nelspruit in 2022. One of the issues that was raised that we have in the Basin was that this Basin is susceptible to floods and also to droughts. These, as we know, these have negative effect on the infrastructure. So we just hope that with this Python model being developed, we shall address the issues which we currently have, which are the drought and the floods. We also have an issue of groundwater management in the Basin. We are still behind in terms of addressing this issue of groundwater management in terms of the water itself, water pollution in the groundwater, and also the abstraction of the groundwater. So we just hope this model that is being developed will assist in that regard. There are also illegal activities that are happening in this basin, illegal activities like sand mining. We know that sand mining has issues because it can delay the water flow. Also, it can divert the flow of the water in the river. So those are part of the issues. Also, there's this issue of real-time data. It is still limited. The availability of real-time data is still limited in this basin. So with the developments of such models as the Python, we just hope such issues will be addressed. And also the issue in general of water resource management, we're still working on it. We haven't reached the point where we'll say we're okay as far as water resources management is concerned. So we're happy that this model is being developed, and as it was highlighted that there is vast data or much data that is available in the Incomati. We just hope that at the end of the day, the model will be able to run and it will be able to make decisions or form decisions in terms of as to how we can address the issues which we do have as the basin. So we're looking forward to the completion of the model, and we believe that as Incomati, we shall be having we shall be able to run this basin optimally. So Jonathan, let me hand it over to you. We are looking forward to the completion of this work which has begun. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, great points, Edward. Thanks a lot. I noted there was also a comment or a question in the Q&A on groundwater, the extent to which this incorporates groundwater. Hopefully we have time to ask the model developers, Naga and Mikias, after this to address that. And the illegal mining point, I think, is also excellent. Okay, let me hand over to Loreen to offer some reactions from her side. Loreen, please go ahead.
All right, thank you. And also to just thank the presenter. for these presentations. I think my take on what has been presented is that these are really good tools in terms of informing decision. And also looking at this from the regional context and what is being driven from the regional context of the SADC protocol, this issue of reasonable and equitable use. Actually, it got me thinking that should this discussion around the agreements be actually a discussion around water allocation, or is it about benefit sharing, which is, I think, the direction that we are beginning to take, in that we should be promoted, actually, because as we move towards limited water resources in the basins, these kind of iterative discussion and considerations around the water, energy, food ecosystem matrix and how some of the agreements impact on that matrix become more important. When we look at the basins like Zambezi, for example, we've seen they've done assessments like the multi-sector investment opportunity analysis, which actually speaks to this idea of benefit sharing, where you are saying, as you have development in the basins, is it a question of water allocation, where you are saying for this member state, we should have so much volume for irrigation, and then we should have equal volume for irrigation in the other member state, and we should have so much allocation for energy? Or is it a question for how do we optimize or maximize on what member state can develop, and how do we then get that into a framework where there is equitable benefits, or where there's benefit sharing across? So I think such tools as this, which were presented today, form a basis for really good discussions around this, because you can iterate between the different solutions, the different extremes, and then decision makers and policy makers can actually make sound decisions based on this. And then we can also have agreements that are living, in the sense that you can always revisit and interrogate what was agreed as minimum flow, or whether it should be a fixed figure, or whether this should be somehow linked to whether we are in a wet year, we are in dry year, and so on and so forth. So my last point would be around the issue of capacity building. I noted in both instances that there is this attempt to build capacity as we develop the model. I've heard that there was like, I'm trying to remember the term that was used, but where we had member states coming in and just learning, young professionals from the member states, learning the workings of the model. And I also noted that fairly commonly used project models like Pitman, WIP were referenced in the framework, which makes a good case for the sustainability agenda, where you have really good tools coming on board, and they inform the dialogue, the decision making, the policy making. But ideally, we should also have capacity built to continue dialoguing around those tools with the professionals that are within the basins themselves. So for me, I think that's also something very positive. So in conclusion, really, I think this notion of reasonable and equitable use, and whether it's well served by agreements that speak to minimum flows, to allocation, I think is a relevant discussion to have going forward. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
great intervention, Lorraine. So I'll offer just a few reactions, but in the meantime, I'm appreciating we're unfortunately not going to have time to verbalize some of the key Q&A points. So I would encourage Naga and Mikias to just engage directly in the comments with the people posing those questions. A couple of reactions, though, quickly from my side. I really liked a lot of your points, Lorene. On capacity development, we've directly built that into the program of work. So each of the workshops that Naga would have mentioned, those were effectively included large capacity building components. You would have heard him say we identified young professionals from each of the 3 countries plus Kobwa as well, who are doing ongoing capacity engagement with Naga and Makias. So no doubt we've thought about that and the sustainability aspect. I think you were alluding as well to this idea of benefit sharing, which I think is excellent. I mean, one of my key hopes for this is we would transition from somewhat of like a crude allocation rule of just a minimum flow from country A to country B to a more dynamic approach of sharing benefits in a more fluid way. So I hope the model and this modeling effort supports that. And then the final point, I really loved your equitable and sustainable point. I mean, that's something that we've been a little bit careful to enter into in terms of the discussions, because we realize that may trigger some more thorny interactions. So, but that's exactly right. That's kind of beneath the surface. I think those are the other issues that are looming in terms of what's equitable across countries. Thanks, great. No, Remy, over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. And great interventions. I actually think that both previous speakers have kind of covered a lot of what I was going to mention, in the sense that it's, I think the thing that I've just come from the region. I've just been in Namibia and Botswana, and water allocation is a very hot topic. So the Water Convention is a global convention on transboundary waters, rivers, lakes, and aquifers, operating at the global level. And we have this program of work area on transboundary water allocation. And I was very interested when I was in those countries to hear about how allocation really is a hot topic. I think that this model and this case study is a great example, because what you're generally hearing is that there is a lack of data. There is a lack of ability to model that in a holistic way for allocation purposes, and also that there's a lack of agreement. And this is the 3 things that this particular model has as a basis. So it doesn't make it any less complex, but I think the kind of foundation elements are there. And just to note that under the convention, we have a program area of work on transboundary water allocation, as Jonathan has noted. So we had a 3-year process to develop a global handbook, which is a global synthesis on water allocation in a transboundary context. Jonathan was on the expert group of more than 50 experts that were part of the formation of that. We actually had the Incomati Maputo case study featured in that handbook. I think it was the early genesis of what we're talking about now in terms of benefits assessments and measuring current and future uses. And as Lorene has said, talking about what constitutes equitable and reasonable use in this kind of framework. So I'll put that in the chat so that people can use that as a potential resource. But I think this case study is a great case study within the region for sharing, and that's already been highlighted by the 2 previous panelists and also the presenters. And I think as a global platform at the Water Convention, it would definitely be something that we would look to include in some of our activities and events and workshops to kind of showcase globally as something that's ongoing in terms of water allocation as a kind of case study. So I think what you're doing is great, and it's something that we could potentially work together on in terms of exchanges with people from other regions of the world who might want to learn from this particular process.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Remy. Yeah, there's been a lot of good presentation and feedback now from the panelists today. Unfortunately, I think we didn't keep to time as well as we should have, so we're down to our last minute or 2. Before we conclude, I did want to give Julian a quick opportunity, Julian Hanaru from University of Manchester, to offer a minute or less of a final thought, and then I'll close. Julian, over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. It was good to hear the panelists there noting that this is a pretty exceptional situation. It has good data and there's a good collaboration between the parties. We think that in this case, another further exciting element here is this potential for a shared model. So the ability to have an open source model, which the intellectual property of the model is shared and belongs to everyone. And then the model can be hosted online so that people can train and build capacity themselves and then use that model on a permanent basis, not just for agreements made every 10, 15 years, but through real collaboration. So it looks like an exciting case study, and it's great to hear that the convention potentially wanted to put it forward as a case study of or as a best practice. So great. It was good to hear this feedback, and thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. Thanks, University of Manchester team, IMI, and there was a set of young professionals who, from each of the countries who I mentioned earlier, who were involved, who deserve credit in this so far as well. So I think this was great. I sincerely apologize to everybody if we haven't responded to some of the great questions in chat around how environmental flows were calculated, and also around the groundwater issue. I would encourage my colleagues Naga and Makias, and I'm happy to support on this, to engage with those people presenting questions in the chat. I just want to conclude with a big thank you to everybody again, and also to remind them that this is number 11 in a series. There will be a number 12. I'm told that the date and focus hasn't been finalized yet, but I'm expecting that's going to come in the next month or two. So thanks again, everybody. Really great feedback from the panelists, and thanks to the presenters for all the work putting together these presentations. Have a good Thursday afternoon. Thanks once again. All the best. Bye-bye.